Welcome to Swai Files. I am Swai. Ruth Wilson, a 16-year-old intelligent and promising girl, vanished without a trace on a cold, rainy day. She declined to go with her friends and instead made her way alone to a desolate hill, Box Hill. No one knows why she chose that place, and when her family received a mysterious bouquet shortly after her disappearance, the mystery deepened. Was this her silent farewell, or is there something more behind her enigmatic disappearance? Ruth Wilson, born on January 31, 1979, was the eldest daughter in a well-off family in Surrey, England. Her parents, Ian and Karen Wilson, were both teachers at local schools. From a young age, Ruth stood out with her intelligence and passion for reading and learning to play musical instruments. Despite her academic pursuits, she also had a vibrant social life, often spending time with friends when she wasn't busy studying or working her Saturday job at a local music shop. However, in the late autumn of 1995, when Ruth was 16 years old, a series of strange and tragic events unfolded, leading to a mystery that persists to this day. In the late summer of that year, Ruth's best friend, Catherine, delivered the sad news that her family would be moving to the city of Sheffield in South Yorkshire. After Catherine moved, the two girls missed each other terribly. To ease their longing, Ruth traveled to Sheffield in late October or early November to stay overnight at Catherine's house. Catherine's mother recalled how the two girls were overjoyed to be reunited, but equally saddened to part ways again. Remarkably, Ruth showed an unusual reluctance to leave. She asked Catherine's mother if she could stay and live with them, but when her request was declined, Ruth seemed on the verge of tears. Catherine's mother even invited Ruth to share if she was having any issues at home, but Ruth refused. Afterward, Catherine's mother contacted Ruth's parents to check, and they assured her that Ruth had no problems at home, merely that she missed her best friend deeply. However, this was not entirely true. On November 25, 1995, Ruth worked her usual shift at the music shop and then went to eat with her ex-boyfriend, Will Kennedy. Although they had broken up, they maintained a friendly relationship. They were also joined by a mutual friend, Neil Phillipson. Both young men later reported that Ruth had paid for their meal. Though Ruth wasn't financially well off, paying for the group was an unusually generous act. Despite their initial objections, Ruth insisted, and they finally relented and let her pay. The next day, Ruth attended orchestra practice at her local church and later went to Will's house for dinner. Will's mother recalled how Ruth appeared happy and healthy, but just before leaving, Ruth asked if she had any old clothes she could borrow. While Mrs. Kennedy found this request a bit odd, she took Ruth upstairs to let her pick out a few items. Ruth seemed extremely grateful, but did not act in any way that raised concern. Monday morning, November 27th, started like any other day. Ruth's parents left early for work, leaving Ruth and her younger sister Jenny to catch the bus to school on their own. However, before Jenny was ready to leave, Ruth told her that she would be walking to school alone. This wasn't entirely unusual, as Ruth was studying for her A-levels and had a more flexible class schedule. When Jenny left for the bus stop, Ruth stayed behind for a few more minutes before departing the house. Not long after, Will Kennedy was driving to school when he saw Ruth walking. He stopped and offered her a ride, but Ruth declined and said she would meet him at school later. However, Ruth never arrived at school that day, and from that moment, no one saw her again. That evening, when Ruth's parents returned home, they didn't find her and contacted the school to ask about her whereabouts. Upon learning that Ruth had been absent since around 9:30 a.m., they immediately notified the Surrey police. The police quickly launched a search operation, collaborating with local radio and television stations to broadcast appeals. Ruth was described as wearing a red knitted jumper, black velvet trousers, black pixie boots, and a small lady's watch on her left wrist. Shortly afterward, a taxi driver contacted the police, saying he had driven Ruth from Dorking train station to Box Hill Country Park. Box Hill is a steep, densely wooded area in the North Downs. After dropping Ruth off near a small path, the driver noticed that instead of continuing on, she just stood there in the rain, looking lost and scared. After losing sight of her for a brief moment, the driver returned to check on her, but Ruth had vanished. This was the last known sighting of Ruth. Her disappearance triggered a widespread search by Surrey police involving professional tracker teams, sniffer dogs, and helicopters. But after 12 hours of continuous searching, no trace of Ruth was found. Further investigation revealed that Ruth frequently visited Box Hill alone, and her academic performance had been declining in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. However, the most shocking theory revolved around the Wilson family's darkest secret. The truth was that Karen Wilson was not Ruth's biological mother. Ruth's birth mother, Nesta Wilson, had died in December 1982, when Ruth was just 3 years old, and her father had remarried Karen less than a year later. Ruth was aware that her biological mother had passed away when she was young, but she had been told it was due to a tragic accident. However, the reality was different. Nesta Wilson's death was actually a result of suicide. The circumstances leading to her death are unclear, but on December 10, 1982, Nesta Wilson hanged herself from a banister in the family home. Ruth's father discovered her and immediately called for emergency services. He then tried his best to shield Ruth and her sister Jenny from knowing that their mother had taken her own life. For 13 years, Ian Wilson kept this secret and ensured that his children were unaware of it. However, Ruth's disappearance occurred at a suspicious time, exactly 14 days before the anniversary of her mother's death. This raised the question: had someone revealed the truth about her mother's death to Ruth? If so, who and why did they do it? 2 days after Ruth's disappearance, a lavish bouquet of flowers was delivered to the Wilson household, addressed to her stepmother Karen, but the card was left blank. The police traced the order and discovered that Ruth had purchased the flowers on the day she disappeared, requesting that they be delivered on November 29th. No one knows why the flowers were sent to Karen or what the true message was. Some speculated it might have been a sign of disrespect, but there were cheaper ways to show disdain. 2 days later, on December 1st, 1995, the police found 3 handwritten letters hidden under a bush on top of Box Hill. One letter was addressed to Ruth's father, one to her stepmother, and the other to her close friends. The handwriting was confirmed to be Ruth's, but the police did not disclose the contents of the letters. This further fueled concern, as nearby, the police discovered a half-empty bottle of alcohol and several empty packs of painkillers. However, there was no evidence to prove that these items belonged to Ruth, nor was anything missing from the Wilson family's liquor cabinet. This news sparked widespread speculation in the media. To rule out the possibility of suicide, the police conducted a second search of the Box Hill area. This time they adjusted their search to focus on finding a body, using cadaver dogs. However, they still found nothing. If Ruth had indeed taken her own life, her body was certainly not in that area. Thus, the police expanded their search into the surrounding countryside, but there were still no clues about Ruth or her body. Mark Williams Thomas, the family liaison officer on the case, told the Wilson family that there was no evidence to suggest Ruth had been murdered or committed suicide, and the police had ruled out the possibility of her being kidnapped. In my experience, he told the family, there are 2 possibilities. Either she went up there to meet someone and voluntarily disappeared, or she died there. And I am convinced it's not the latter. 8 months after Ruth's sudden disappearance, the investigation took a new turn. With no evidence pointing to Ruth's death, those involved in the case began to believe that she was still alive. Ruth's father and stepmother appeared on television, stating that they believed she was too afraid to return home. Photos of Ruth with blonde or red hair were circulated, assuming that she might have changed her appearance to avoid being recognized. Sussex police also set up a 24-hour hotline, hoping to receive tips from the public, but no calls led to significant clues. Then one day, Ruth's best friend Catherine received an unexpected visit from the police. They arrived with a search warrant and thoroughly searched her family's home, clearly suspecting that the family was hiding Ruth. Catherine's family felt insulted by the accusation, asserting that they were also grieving Ruth's disappearance and would have informed her parents at the first sign of her return. A few months later, the case took another strange twist. Exactly 1 year after Ruth disappeared, a teenage girl with short-cropped hair walked into a convenience store about 3 kilometers from Box Hill. The girl appeared visibly distressed and requested to buy all the remaining newspapers in the store. When informed that they had run out, she left in extreme frustration. The store clerk later recalled that she bore a striking resemblance to Ruth. This only deepened the mystery surrounding Ruth Wilson's whereabouts. The police immediately launched an investigation into the case and searched for any evidence related to the girl who appeared at the convenience store. However, no additional credible leads emerged from the incident. Those who witnessed the event, including the store clerk, could not confirm with certainty whether the girl was indeed Ruth Wilson. Nonetheless, this event sparked renewed hope for the Wilson family, leading them to continue believing that Ruth was still alive and trying to make indirect contact with her loved ones. Additionally, the police did not dismiss the possibility that someone may have impersonated Ruth to mislead the investigation. This led to an expanded investigation into people connected to Ruth before her disappearance, including her school friends, teachers, and colleagues at the music shop where she worked. However, all efforts to uncover the truth about Ruth's whereabouts yielded no concrete results. In December 1996, the Wilson family received an unexpected and mysterious gift: a postcard with no return address, containing only a brief message, "Merry Christmas from Ruth." This once again plunged Ruth's family into a spiral of doubt, wondering whether it was genuine or just a cruel joke by someone. The police analyzed the postcard but found no traces that could identify the sender, and they were unable to confirm whether the postcard had indeed come from Ruth. Despite this, Ruth's family held on to hope and continued searching for new leads. However, over time, the investigations gradually went cold. No further evidence or significant clues surfaced, and the police were forced to suspend active search efforts. Ruth Wilson's case became one of the largest unsolved mysteries in the UK, haunting not only her family but also the public. In the years that followed, several new theories emerged, but most were based on speculation and lacked concrete evidence. Some believed Ruth had deliberately disappeared, perhaps to escape from the psychological or familial pressures she was facing. Others suggested she may have fallen victim to an abduction or even a murder, with her body yet to be found. All of these theories remained conjecture, with no convincing evidence to close the case. In 2000, Surrey police announced that Ruth Wilson's disappearance remained an open case and that they were ready to reinvestigate if any new evidence came to light. However, to this day, Ruth's whereabouts remain an unsolved mystery. Her family, despite years of grief and faint hope, continues to hold out hope that one day they will learn the truth about what happened to their daughter on that fateful November day in 1995. Ruth Wilson's story is not just about a young girl who went missing, but a painful reminder of the mysteries and heartbreak that her family and many others still face to this very day. Born on April 3, 1966, Loreen Ron grew up primarily under the care of her mother in Manchester, New Hampshire. By the time she entered her teenage years, Loreen and her mother lived in a third-floor apartment on Merrimack Street. She was known as a good student, loved by her friends, and had a strong relationship with her mother. Loreen also dreamed of becoming an actress and took singing and dancing classes outside of her regular school hours at Parkside Junior High. But as her 14th birthday approached, things began to change. According to Loreen's aunt, she was an angel, but started hanging out with the wrong crowd. However, a more practical explanation was that Loreen began making very poor choices. She neglected her singing and dancing classes in favor of drinking alcohol and smoking marijuana. While this was a common and relatively harmless form of teenage rebellion, it may have pointed to a more dangerous problem. On the evening of April 26, 1980, Loreen's mother, Judith Ron, left her daughter at home alone to visit her boyfriend, a tennis player who was competing in a tournament. Normally, Loreen would accompany her mother on these trips, but this time she asked to stay home, as she felt she was old enough to take care of herself. Judith left in the afternoon after arranging for some relatives to check in on Loreen throughout the day. These visits were carried out as planned, and those who dropped by noted that Loreen was relaxing by herself. However, Lorene was no fool. She was simply waiting for the last relative to leave, and once everything settled down, she called her friends and invited them over. A few hours later, 2 of Lorene's friends arrived at the apartment and found her with a 6-pack of beer and a bottle of wine. The group drank and smoked for the next few hours until around 12:30 a.m., when they heard voices in the hallway outside the apartment. Thinking it was Lorene's mother returning from dinner with her boyfriend, one of her friends quickly ran out the back door and down the fire escape. This friend was a boy and slightly older than Lorene, meaning her mother would never have approved of him being there so late. After sending him off, Lorene locked the door and returned to her other friend to maintain the cover. The next 45 minutes remain a complete mystery. The only thing we know for sure is that the voices outside the hallway were not those of Lorene's mother or her boyfriend, as they did not arrive home until after 1:15 a.m. When Judith Ron and her boyfriend entered the apartment building early on the morning of April 27th, the first thing Judith did was flip the light switch to illuminate the shared hallway, but it remained in darkness. Confused by the sudden power outage, Judith's boyfriend checked the building's fuse box, but everything was in order. That's when Judith discovered why the hallway lights weren't working. Someone had loosened the light bulbs, and they had done so on every floor of the building. Naturally, both of them felt a deep sense of unease and hurried upstairs to Judith's apartment to check on her daughter. They found the front door unlocked and undamaged. As they stepped inside and turned on the lights, everything seemed normal. Lorene's bedroom was dark and quiet, but her mother could clearly see the shape of a person lying under the covers. Judith sighed with relief, but to be sure, she moved closer to check if her daughter was all right. That was not Lorene. Judith Ron found herself staring into the bloodshot, dilated eyes of Lorene's friend. When asked where Lorene was, the friend had no idea. The intoxicated girl explained that around midnight, she and Lorene had decided to go to bed. But instead of going to her own bed, Lorene had given it up for her guest while she chose to sleep on the couch in the apartment's living room. The friend didn't seem to realize that she had been alone in the apartment for about 45 minutes, and all 3 of them began to panic. Judith hurriedly called 911 while her boyfriend began searching the area by car. Shortly after 3:45 a.m., Lorene Ron was officially declared missing. In the weeks that followed, the leading theory of the investigating police officers was that Lorene had run away. They pointed out that there were no signs of a struggle in the apartment, and they referenced the testimony of a bus station employee who claimed to have sold a ticket to a girl resembling Lorene on the day she disappeared. However, when shown a photo of Lorene, the employee was no longer sure. Although the runaway theory wasn't ruled out, police began questioning the 2 friends who had been with Lorene that night. The female friend stated that she had passed out shortly after 12:30 a.m., and that her memory of the night's events was vague due to the alcohol she had consumed. She remembered hearing voices outside the apartment just before she fell asleep, but didn't think much of it. Lorene's boyfriend admitted that he had been at the apartment that night, but as previously mentioned, he claimed that he had hurriedly left when he heard voices. Notably, the boy appeared extremely anxious during police questioning, and at one point, he admitted to feeling an overwhelming sense of guilt for his actions. While some might view this as enough to make him a suspect, he maintained that he had no involvement in Lorene's disappearance. His regret stemmed from the thought that if he had stayed, things might have turned out very differently. Law enforcement seemed satisfied with the boy's explanation and never officially considered him a suspect, but later developments cast doubt on this conclusion. 6 months passed without the police making any breakthroughs in the case. Then one day, Judith Ron noticed a strange irregularity on her phone bill. On October 1st, while reviewing her statement, she spotted 2 unfamiliar phone numbers. One of the numbers belonged to a motel in Santa Monica, California, while the other was for a teen health helpline. The police managed to contact the operator of the helpline, who turned out to be a doctor in Santa Ana. He explained that the helpline provided health advice to teenage girls, most of their inquiries being related to reproductive health and contraception. However, the helpline also had another purpose. The doctor claimed that some calls came from exploited women and girls, and on a few occasions, he and his wife had helped these girls escape their nightmarish circumstances. He added that Annie Sprinkle, an educator and former adult film actress, had played a crucial role in this effort by providing information about the exploitative tactics used by unscrupulous producers. They had helped around 4 or 5 different girls, but insisted that Lorene was not one of them. If she had been, they would have been willing to cooperate, but at the moment, they knew nothing about her fate. Another promising lead emerged when the police began investigating how a 14-year-old girl could have obtained a 6-pack of beer and a bottle of wine. When questioned, the 2 friends who had visited Lorene on the night she disappeared claimed that the alcohol was already there when they arrived, and all they had brought was a bit of tobacco and some marijuana. They were too excited by the presence of the alcohol to ask where it had come from. However, they had a pretty clear idea of how Lorene might have gotten it. On the day she disappeared, one of Lorene's classmates from her high school had seen her stocking the refrigerator at a local convenience store. This led to the theory that Lorene may have struck some sort of deal with the store owner, doing some odd jobs in exchange for alcohol. But why risk getting caught for a crime when you could legally hire someone? Unfortunately, it was never proven that the store owner gave her the alcohol, but for many, this detail marked an investigative angle that had not been fully explored. Someone like this could have known Lorene planned to drink that night, and with predatory intentions, they might have seen it as an opportunity. On an autumn night in 1981, Judith Ron woke up to the sound of the phone ringing. She picked up the phone and brought the receiver to her ear, but all she heard was silence. She sleepily greeted the caller, but they remained silent, and after a few moments of cold silence, they hung up. The call had come shortly after 3:45 a.m., and the following night, the mysterious caller phoned again at nearly the same time. These calls continued irregularly over the next few years, with the frequency increasing around the holiday season. Lorene's Aunt Janet also received several mysterious calls in the years following her niece's disappearance. Like the calls to Judith, Janet would often only hear silence when she answered the phone, but on one occasion, the caller spoke. Janet later said she was certain the caller was a teenage girl, and that she simply asked to speak to Mike. Mike was Janet's son and Lorene's cousin. While most people called him Michael, only Lorene called him Mike. On the rare occasions when Michael answered the late-night mysterious calls, the caller remained completely silent and hung up after a few moments. For a long time, Judith believed that these calls were connected to her daughter's disappearance, but eventually, when she found the strength to move on with her life, she changed her phone number, and the calls suddenly stopped. In the months after the calls ceased, Lorene's case gradually went cold, and the officers working on it were reassigned. It wasn't until 1985 that there was a breakthrough in the case, and it was both mysterious and shocking. The boy who had spent time with Lorene on the night she disappeared had never been publicly named because he was too young, but when he was found hanging by a rope in his one-bedroom apartment, the news quickly reached Judith. It is unclear whether he left a suicide note, but if he did, this detail was never made public. Why he chose to take his own life will forever remain a mystery, but one cannot help but wonder whether some underlying guilt was behind this death. The truth remains that we don't know what really happened before Lorene disappeared, and although the police never officially considered him a suspect, his sudden death remains highly suspicious. That same year, Roger Moray, a childhood friend of Lorene, received a phone call. Roger wasn't able to speak, but his mother asked who was calling. Lori was the answer. When Roger's mother asked if the caller wanted to leave a message, the caller hung up. These continuous phone calls led some to believe that Lorene was still alive and well, at least at the time the calls were made. They speculated that after being exploited by Dr. Z and his associates, Lorene felt too ashamed to return home, but still wanted to hear her family's voices from time to time. It's a heartbreaking story, but one that has been entirely dismissed by more skeptical minds. An amateur investigator theorized that if Lorene had indeed been exploited, she might have been killed shortly afterward for being considered a threat. But if that were the case, who made those phone calls? As dark and terrifying as it may seem, it's possible that the traffickers themselves made the calls as some kind of sick entertainment. They could have recorded Lorene saying a few words, perhaps the names of family members she missed, and then played it back over the phone to her grieving loved ones, who undoubtedly would be filled with false hope. It's also possible that they didn't need to record anything from Lorene at all, simply using another kidnapped girl of the same age to impersonate her. In the end, if that truly was Lorene on the phone, why did she never say anything else beyond asking to speak with her cousin Mike? Perhaps at first she felt too ashamed, but complete silence, year after year, and she never found the courage to say something as simple as, "I love you, Mom." It's a profoundly dark theory, made even more heartbreaking by the fact that Dr. Z was never properly investigated for any potential connection to Lorene's disappearance. These dense wooded areas were thoroughly searched by the dogs and the off-duty Green Berets, but no traces of any struggle or scent trails were found. However, one Green Beret pointed out that if Andy had been abducted immediately after leaving the pool, it was highly unlikely that the dogs would be able to track him. Either he had been kidnapped by an extremely intelligent, dangerous predator, or something much more terrifying and inexplicable had occurred. Just 6 days after Andy was declared missing, authorities scaled back the search, and Andy's family was forced to confront the painful reality that he might never return. A week later, a man named Wayne Chapman was arrested in Waterloo, New York on suspicion of impersonating a police officer. In his truck, police found obscene images of children, maps of forested areas, duct tape, high-end camera equipment, and a child's bloody sock. Faced with this overwhelming evidence, Chapman confessed to abusing 2 boys, both assaults having taken place in Andy Puglisi's hometown of Lawrence, Massachusetts. However, despite being considered the prime suspect, Chapman was never arrested or charged in connection with Andy's disappearance. And that's because, despite the abundance of forensic evidence, none of it directly linked him to Andy's case. This is where the theories start to get strange. In 1998, Andy's childhood friend, Melanie Perkins, completed 7 years of hard work by releasing a documentary. Did you see Andy? This multi-part documentary explores the events that took place on that fateful August afternoon and revisits the details surrounding Andy's disappearance. It is a thoroughly researched film, and in the process of making it, Melanie discovered something truly shocking. According to the case files, police estimated that at least 5 known predators were in the vicinity of the public pool the day Andy disappeared, one of whom was stalking a bus full of children with the intent to abduct. However, perhaps the most disturbing and mysterious testimony in the documentary comes from 2 local men named Alan and Tony, who were children during the late summer of 1976. About a year or 2 after the events of that late August afternoon, Alan and Tony were walking through the woods behind the public pool where Andy had disappeared when they discovered something unexpected. On the ground in the woods, about 50 feet off a public trail, there was a large, perfectly rectangular hole. The sides and bottom of the hole were flat, they said, as if something large had been removed from it, like a trunk or a coffin. When they returned 2 days later, the hole had been completely filled in, and so expertly that it was almost impossible to determine its original location. Neither of the men believed this was related to Andy Puglisi's disappearance, but when they heard about the documentary, they decided to finally break their silence. In the documentary, Melanie mentions hearing rumors about a forensic excavation site in the woods behind the public pool, and she believed that this was what the 2 men had witnessed. However, Alan and Tony disagreed. They felt that the deep hole appeared to have been cut out of the ground perfectly, like it had been made by a giant cookie cutter. There were no police tape, no shovels or digging tools, and no officers present to warn them that it was a crime scene. But most importantly, there was no pile of dirt dug up around the hole. The two boys frequently walked in the area and dismissed the idea that they could have missed or simply forgotten any law enforcement involvement. To them, the hole appeared one day and disappeared the next, and they have never been able to rationally explain it. More practical-minded people tend to assume that Wayne Chapman is the number one suspect, or that there is another reasonable explanation, but the mysterious hole in the ground has become a focal point for those inclined to believe in supernatural phenomena. Since then, Andy's disappearance has caught the attention of readers of David Paulides' Missing 4-in-1 series. These books detail a number of unsolved disappearances, but these cases tend to fall into a particular category. The victims are often children and tend to vanish mysteriously around forests, mountains, or near bodies of water. But what makes a Missing 4-in-1 case stand out is the potential for supernatural intervention. Many may scoff at the word supernatural, but in this case, the supernatural doesn't necessarily have to involve Bigfoot or UFOs, but rather some other phenomenon, more tangible yet still unexplainable. In the past 100 years, our understanding of the physical space we live in has changed dramatically. From the pioneers of nuclear physics to the ever-evolving laser technology, even our closest ancestors would be shocked by the advancements we've made. So in another 100 years, perhaps scientists will be able to explain why a ton of Earth can disappear and then reappear days later, or why a boy can be with us one moment and gone the next. Derek James Engbretson was born on July 5, 1990, in the small town of Klamath Falls, Oregon. He was a smart but shy boy who loved outdoor activities. Derek had brown hair, dark eyes, and a radiant smile. On December 5, 1998, when he was 8 years old, Derek agreed to go with his father and grandfather to Pelican Butte near Rocky Point, Oregon. The three of them planned to find a suitable Christmas tree to cut down and bring home. This was an annual tradition for the men in the family, and Derek was excited to be the one to choose the tree for his family. The three drove to Pelican Butte, parked their truck, and then walked through the snow-covered forest, dodging snowballs that Derek playfully threw as they went. Eventually, they found a tree of the right size, and after making sure Derek approved, his father and grandfather began cutting it down. It was a scene straight out of a Christmas card, but the Engbretson family had no idea that day would end in a true nightmare. While Derek's father and grandfather were busy cutting down the tree, they only took their eyes off him for about 2 to 3 minutes. But when they turned back, Derek was gone. Knowing that he couldn't have gone far on foot, Derek's father quickly ran around the forest, searching for signs and calling his name. But strangely, there was no trace of him. Derek's father suddenly realized something terrifying. For Derek to disappear so quickly, someone or something must have taken him. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, Derek's father and grandfather rushed back to the truck and drove quickly to the nearest phone. At exactly 4:13 p.m., Derek Engbretson was officially declared missing. Despite the fading daylight, the Klamath County Sheriff's Department immediately launched a search effort. They deployed officers and search dogs around the Pelican Butte area, and initially there was still hope. Derek's parents told the police that their son had grown up in the mountains and had been taught some survival skills in cold weather. Moreover, Derek's father mentioned that when he disappeared, Derek had a small axe with him, meaning that even at 8 years old, he was better equipped to defend himself than most children his age. As the police continued the search, evidence of Derek's upbringing became apparent. By morning, officers found a makeshift shelter made from branches and fallen logs. Nearby, they discovered small footprints in the snow, and after following the tracks, they found that they led from where Derek's father last saw him to a small clearing near a highway. However, what they found there was truly strange. It was a snow angel, and as you can imagine, it raised many questions. Since it was the only clue found in the area, there was reason to believe it belonged to Derek, but no one could understand why the boy would suddenly stop to make a snow angel. There was no way Derek could have moved that far in the short time his father lost track of him. A lost and scared child wouldn't be in the mood to play in the snow. Suggestions that the snow angel could be a sign of a struggle were dismissed because it was too perfectly formed to be the result of a random altercation. The police then tried to continue following the small footprints, but a sudden snowstorm made their work incredibly difficult. When the storm passed, the search resumed. Additional search dogs were brought to Pelican Butte, and several civil patrol planes and rescue helicopters searched from above. Unfortunately, no further traces of Derek were found, and just 8 days later, the search was called off. Derek's family continued their investigation without law enforcement support for a long time, but to no avail. They later received help from hundreds of civilian volunteers from across North America, but again, no progress was made. Then one day, a local resident approached the police with disturbing information. On the day Derek disappeared, they claimed to have witnessed a man struggling with a boy in the area where Derek went missing. Additionally, there were other reports of an unidentified man driving a 2-door Honda who had asked passersby for directions to the forest. Police attempted to track down this man, but were unsuccessful. On September 24, 1999, the Harney County Sheriff's Department in Oregon received a call from a frightened resident. They had discovered graffiti in the restroom at the Sage Hen Rest area, over 200 miles from Pelican Butte, and the graffiti was related to Derek's abduction. When informed of the graffiti's content, Derek's mother told the media, "I think it's just a sick joke. If someone took Derek, and if they wrote this on the wall, they want to be caught. If they want to be caught, why didn't they leave something of Derek's there?" Many have speculated about the exact content written on the wall, but to this day, it has not been made public. This is likely out of respect for the personal request of Derek's family, as if they truly believe it was just a sick joke. There would be no point in publicizing it. However, based on what Derek's mother said, it's not difficult to infer what the graffiti might have claimed. Someone may have confessed to abducting the boy and possibly claimed to be keeping him alive, or at least holding his body as some kind of sick trophy. The suggestion that they could have left something of Derek's at the truck stop hints at the possibility that they might be holding some of his personal belongings. In 2008, police confirmed that a man named Frank James Milligan had been considered a potential suspect in Derek's disappearance. At the time, he was serving a heavy sentence for abusing a 10-year-old child in a town near Salem, Oregon, and his modus operandi seemed eerily similar to Derek's disappearance. However, to this day, Milligan has not been charged in connection with Derek's case, and the possibility of his conviction seems to be fading. But to abduct Derek right under his father's nose, Milligan would have had to follow the family into the woods and then quietly slip away without making a sound. This seems nearly impossible, especially with thick snow covering the ground. If they had used a chainsaw to cut down the Christmas tree, Derek's father might not have heard his son's cries, but the two men were only using an axe, which wouldn't have made enough noise to mask the sound of a child abduction. But if Frank Milligan wasn't responsible for Derek's disappearance, then who was? The truth about what happened to Derek that day has remained a mystery for 25 years, and perhaps this case won't be solved anytime soon. However, the question remains: was Derek the victim of a hateful but explainable predator, whether human or animal, or did something else happen in the forest that day, something we're still not ready to believe? So, the stories of mysterious disappearances still leave many questions unanswered. What really happened that day? Was there some other force at play, or was it simply a terrifying crime we've yet to fully uncover? What do you think about this case? Do you have any other theories? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. I'd love to hear your opinions and discuss this mysterious story with you. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next mystery stories.